children are kind of like that. Like they're just so connected to their bodies. They know exactly when they're hungry. There is all of this stuff in our foods that is really detrimental, and people are becoming really aware of it, and they're demanding better. And I think it's kind of an exciting time. Protein is satiating, but protein plus ketones to me is the most satiating combination. What's really interesting too is that glucose metabolism in the brain does start to diminish as people get older, but the ketone metabolism doesn't. It's really conserved. When you eat whey protein, you usually have a high amount of leucine in there. It initiates this process of muscle protein synthesis, and insulin is involved in that process, and it does rise, but it's a good thing.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly. We have Vanessa with us today. Thank you for joining us and doing this. I know you and I have talked a number of times over the years. I think we both interviewed each other a couple times. And so you're still over there in the beautiful Czech Republic. I guess my question is, what have you been up to? What's the latest? I know I think you've had some babies and stuff like that, or at least one. I'm not sure. I can't keep track, but you've been working on your education and all kinds of stuff. So give me an update of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I've been busy. I've had a couple of kids. I've had 2 boys. We've been really blessed to have 2 incredible boys. Luca is 3.5 now, and Damien just turned 1. So they keep me super busy. But mostly what I've been up to is running my podcast, which is, just like yours, like really performing well and consistently. And I feel so honored and blessed to be able to do what I do, because I don't know about you, but I love podcasting so much. And I'm working on some new things. I'm working on a new book. I'm working on some new meal plans and that kind of stuff, which has been nice to get back to, because I haven't really been able to do that since I had the kids. Like I've just been so busy with them. So I'm really excited to be doing that, and still have my Tone device, the breath ketone analyzer. So still doing a lot of research on ketones, on high protein diets. And there just seems to be just never ending amount of amazing research constantly coming out, which gives me plenty to do and plenty to talk about on my podcast, just breaking down the latest studies. There's one that I just found last week, which was this new hormone that was discovered called LEAP2. And there was a connection between high protein diets and ketones. And it was fascinating, just to go through some of the mechanisms. So I feel like I'm just in a really good spot and feeling very blessed and thankful for all of it.
Yeah, it's interesting, where our interest lies. I mean, I'm really quite interested in some of the stuff on human performance, because that's just what I'm really interested in now, particularly as I get close to 60. I want to do some fairly challenging things as a 60-year-old. But yeah, I mean, there was just a recent study. Ian Campbell just published a study on ketones and bipolar disorder. Pilot trial just dropped this morning, I saw. And it just showed that, as ketone levels went up, less anxiety, more energy, better mood, less impulsivity, just directly correlated to their ketone levels. So that's interesting stuff. Let me ask you, because you said you've got 2 little kiddos now, and that changes life, as you, I'm sure, are aware at this point. How has having kids impacted or changes your thoughts on nutrition and things like that? Because you got to feed these little guys, these little critters got to eat, and it changes your time and all that stuff. So how has that impacted you?
Oh, it's such a fun question. I absolutely love it. And it's really, I think, a beautiful experience to have children, especially with my nutrition background and anyone who has a nutrition background, and you have kids, because you see how connected children are to their bodies and to their sense of hunger and appetite. And you see all the things that we talk about all the time, like your protein stat and this kind of stuff. You see how self-regulated it is with kids, because they don't have all of that food noise that we have in our heads from like reading different books and magazines and different, media and a lot of disinformation out there and misinformation, bad facts and stuff that gets in our heads about how we should eat, and it makes us so neurotic about how we should eat. When we talk a lot about how you look at animals, like they just hunt when they're hungry, and when they're not, they rest. And children are kind of like that. Like they're just so connected to their bodies. They know exactly when they're hungry. And, when they've had their protein needs met, like they don't want any more meat or protein. When they've had their energy need met, they don't want anything else. And it's really fun to just, like for us, we don't give them any processed foods, really, like very minimally processed foods. So they're extremely connected to their natural sense of fullness, their satiety and everything. And they don't have their dopamine receptor sort of hijacked, their brains hijacked by, the modern high processed, hyper palatable foods. So because of that, it's really fun, to cook for them and see what they're drawn to innately, and how connected they are to their bodies. Cause I think we'd all be like that if, we didn't have all this like food propaganda, that's all this marketing and, all of this, bad information, disinformation that really tells us, how to eat. So Luca just loves, having burgers, burger meat. He knows burger meat and steak makes him strong and grows his muscles. And, eggs do that for him too. And he eats it and he says, look at my muscles. And, he's only 3, but like he gets it. So that's been such a beautiful experience. And I really love that question.
Yeah. So now you're like we mentioned, you're in the Czech Republic, and I know you sometimes spend time in the U.S. You're originally from, I think, Denver or something like that. That's the last time I remember talking to you. So you can compare and contrast the different food availability. I know right now in the U.S. we're going through this MAHA sort of thing, and people are questioning our food supply. Any commentary on the differences that you see? I mean, as you compare the two places.
I mean, that's pretty clear, I think, for myself and for other expats. So I'm originally from Vancouver, but I grew up overseas, like in China and all over the place. My husband's from Colorado, so that's become our new home. But living in Europe, you just know that because the standards are so high and so strict with the food, that it makes you a lot more comfortable just buying sort of like non-organic produce, because it's very controlled, and it's all the way from produce to like even things like makeup. Like you just know that it's very well controlled. And I don't feel the same way when we're back home. I feel like I always have to get or try to get stuff that's organic, or try to find local farms and ranchers and source my food more carefully. But here the standards are very strict when it comes to food. And I'm not sure why that is, but it seems like people back home are starting to demand better and become more aware. I think people in our community have been for a while, but the average person probably doesn't pay too much attention to it. But we are seeing with Robert Kennedy Jr. and this big movement, happening now, where people are really concerned about what is in their food and the quality of their food, and these studies that are coming out, showing things like this, red food coloring, I forget what the number of it or whatever it was, but it is linked to cancers. Like there is all of this stuff in our foods that is really detrimental, and people are becoming really aware of it, and they're demanding better. And I think it's kind of an exciting time, to be witnessing like all these changes, especially when it comes to our health and our food system. So I'm really excited to see what RFK does. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly, I think it's great that this is finally at the forefront, that somebody's actually tackling this, because it's been a problem for many, many decades, as is clear, and he's got a mandate to do that. I hope that, I mean, obviously there's things you can do to make things potentially worse. I have some concerns around that, but I think generally it's shining a light on here, and hopefully, there'll be some substantial changes that actually make. I think the bigger things are getting some of these conflicts of interest out of the places like the FDA, out of the USDA, and some of those things might allow for
I was just
better
just looking at a post about that today. Yeah. That revolving door between the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, you have the I guess somebody who is just the head of drug approvals at the
At the
FDA.
FDA.
Is now on the Pfizer, one of the Pfizer top people now. So that has to stop, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk. So speaking of drugs, I just saw a headline that David Unwin shared from someplace in the UK. It says the title is "Fat Jabs Linked to 82 Deaths," and so they found 82 people have dropped dead from taking these Ozempic type shots. These GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Really?
And that may just be the tip of the iceberg. I suspect there's probably quite a few more that we'll probably find out. So I don't think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the Czech Republic has a huge obesity problem. Do they, or no?
It's like the fattest country in Europe.
Is it really? I didn't realize that. I didn't think.
Yeah, but I mean, walking
that.
around, you wouldn't think so because, like you see these really tall, lean Europeans. And in general, the average European person is a lot more lean and slender and for some reason really tall. But it is becoming a growing problem here, just like it is in Asia. And there's definitely people eat more whole foods in general, and they also eat more organ meats. Like they're way more connected to like the nose to tail. That's very present here. Like culturally, the way that people eat their food, they eat a lot of fermented food. And every restaurant you go to has liver pate or some kind of liver, like even like fried liver or something on the menu, or like beef heart, and usually served with some kind of fermented like sauerkraut or something. So they're very connected to their food in that way. But people also consume a lot of beer. I think Czech is like maybe number 2 after Ireland, and bread and pastries. Like it's quite a problem. People do tend to walk and do a lot more walking than driving here and taking public transportation. So I think that helps, but it's coming, and you're definitely seeing, a growing rise in a lot of the, issues like obesity and all the non-infectious diseases that are connected, with insulin resistance and obesity are on the rise here. Ozempic hasn't made it here yet. Like Ozempic and the GLP-1 agonists are not offered here yet. I think they probably will be coming, but it's a really interesting conversation and one I've definitely been paying attention to. I didn't see that post by Dr. Unwin, but I did see recently about some research showing that within the first year of using GLP-1 agonists, a lot of people are having thyroid cancer. I'm not sure on the exact numbers. Did you see that? That thyroid cancer seems to be on the rise with populations who are taking these GLP-1 agonists. So I'm not surprised to see that there's more. There's also been, as you know, a lot of side effects like, stomach peristalsis, stomach, what is it?
Gastroparesis. Gastroparesis.
Gastroparesis, issues with like that and other issues that people have been facing. So there's a lot of conversation about, well, if you're going to use these, you make sure to, optimize your protein intake and also do resistance training. But it seems like, you're going to have to be on these drugs indefinitely if you want to maintain your fat loss. So in my opinion, there's just way better ways of achieving similar improvements in metabolic health and fitness, and just lowering your body fat percentage without having to use drugs and without having to, take on these risks potentially, like you were just talking about. That's pretty alarming, in addition to the thyroid cancer risk. And like you said, there's probably more that's going to be coming out.
Yeah, I mean, there's some rare cases of blindness. There's like this rare type of blindness. It doubles in people. It's not super common, but it does increase, and suicidality and some other issues. I want to comment. You mentioned the beer, because I remember that I was in the Czech Republic, but it was 1997 or something like that. I remember going into a gas station, and the gas station attendant was literally sitting there drinking a beer while I was at work, and I thought, this is pretty unusual, because they like their beer there for sure. I was in Slovakia. I was in Slovakia last fall, so I was kind of close. I wasn't too far away. Are you in Prague, or what part are you in?
Yes, in Prague.
Yeah, I've been there once. Yeah, Charles Bridge, very beautiful area.
It is.
So let's talk, because last time we had talked, I know you were really jumping into protein quite a bit. How has your thinking on protein evolved over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I got started out in this space doing keto, and then I decided to try carnivore and do this high protein experiment. And it was so transformative in my life because keto had gotten me some results. I had gone from 38% body fat down to 32. So I was making progress. I was feeling better in a lot of ways. But that really wasn't the rate of progress I wanted to be seeing. So then I did this high protein experiment, and I tried to eat as much lean protein as I could in a day for a month. And it was very easy to do that with Carnivore. And within 2 years, I got down to 21% body fat, and I wasn't really doing much exercise. So it remarkably transformed not just my body composition, but also my appetite. It was the first time in my life, in that first month of Carnivore, that I felt satisfied from a meal, where I could just put down my fork with a plate, still having food on it, and not be thinking about food anymore. And then I would feel free from thoughts of food for hours and hours on end. I had never experienced that. I dealt with a lot of food addiction. I was plant-based for most of my adult life. I was always almost like, just tormented by thoughts of food all the time, thinking about food. And I now realize I was so deficient in protein. And, I was mostly eating carbs and fats, which is what a lot of people end up doing when they're plant-based. You're just thinking, if it's not from an animal, it must be healthy. Like that. It's just so, but that's really what, in that culture, like sort of the vegan, raw vegan lifestyle, you really think is, if it's not from an animal. And I hear people today, still in my life that I meet who are, trying to pursue this plant-based lifestyle, and they say similar things. Like, if it's not from an animal, it must be good for you. And I cringe when I hear it, because I believed that for such a long time. And all it did was end up giving me such poor body composition over time. So I've been so happy with my results from that. That's been about 5 or 6 years ago now that I first started that. I guess 5 years now. And it just continues to amaze me. So I do a high protein ketogenic approach. And, protein, as we know, has all these incredible effects on satiety, on our satiety hormones. A lot of them are produced in the gut, like GLP-1, which is what these injectables are doing with much longer half-lives. But our bodies can produce that. Protein really is nature's Ozempic, in my opinion. So doing this high protein approach has been so transformative. One of the things that I have been doing a little bit more of now is actually adding some ketones. So I used to always say for years, like, don't take ketones, just make them. Your body can make them. Your body's so good at making ketones. But now, having a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, I've been in my sleep deprived era, and I started noticing that my cognition was suffering, especially when I was working and podcasting. So I noticed that if I would fast until dinner, I would usually get ketones, and my thinking and mental clarity, sharpness, and everything came back. But I can't always fast until I podcast, which is like at 4 or 5 in the day. So there are days now where I've started supplementing with ketones. So I feel like I'm back to my original, keto days, when I first started learning about, these magical, in my opinion, molecules and how incredible they are, and all the epigenetic benefits that they have, the benefits they have on the mitochondria. And, protein is satiating, but protein plus ketones, to me, is the most satiating combination that you can have. So that's sort of one of the things that I've been changing up more. So I'm still doing high protein keto, but I've been focusing a little bit more on adding some ketones in. I know that last time we talked, I think it was back in September, maybe when I was in Greece, you were doing a keto diet because of an injury that you had to reduce some of the neuroinflammation.
Yeah. I had a neck injury. I had a disc injury in my neck from getting dumped on my head during jiu-jitsu, and, all 250 pounds of me plus another 220 pounds from the other guy that was the wrestler that did that. So I had a pretty acute disc herniation. I was in pretty damn severe pain. And so it did help. And that's something that I the literature does support that ketones seem to suppress neuroinflammation. So it did help. It resolved that I'm pretty much asymptomatic at this point. I still have a little bit of numbness in my finger that just hasn't gone away, unfortunately, but normal strength, normal range of motion, no pain. So that certainly helped. I do want to comment, this is a thing about protein being satiating. And I think there is some thought around that to the extent that you are limited on protein, like if you're, like you said, you were under eating protein for years, and then you brought it to sufficiency, and that's very satiating. But then somebody would say that, but beyond that point, the satiety benefit is sort of diminished. That is to say, if I need 200 grams of protein a day, if I eat 400, I'm not going to be any more satiated with that. I don't know if you've looked into that at all, or because what did you require when you say I finally could eat unlimited protein or unlimited food? How much protein were you actually consume? Probably, my guess is 150 grams or something like that. But I don't know. You might correct me on that.
Yeah, no, I usually, like, I was getting around on that first, high protein experiment, like 180 to 260 grams a day. But I don't need that much. I think that at the beginning, and a lot of people who go on carnivore experience this, is at the beginning, especially if you have a background like mine, being plant-based for like years and years, like 17 years, for me, I needed to like almost overcompensate at first. I think my body really needed to replenish some protein. And after a while, like a lot of people go on carnivore, they notice that like they have sort of an appetite regulation that happens. So I don't eat that much today. Like it's more like 150, somewhere between 150 to 200 grams. I still do eat a lot, but some days it's lower. Like if I have an OMAD day, it's, it probably gets like 120 or something grams in that day. So it just depends on the day. But I do agree with you. I think there's definitely a point that you reach of diminishing returns, especially when it comes to satiety. And that's sort of when the ketones can come into play as well. But I think with regards to appetite, muscle protein synthesis, pretty much all the functions that protein performs for you, you get to a point where more doesn't really like it. Even they've shown now with some recent meta-analysis and reanalyzing some older data of how much protein you should be consuming when you're in a fat loss phase. It seems like you can go as, quite high, but there's a point where, you're adding on more. You can have it if you like that, but it doesn't really bring you additional benefits, as you were saying.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly. Well, let me just, because I haven't discussed this in a while, but I mean, the ketones, exogenous ketones, as you're discussing, I mean, they come in different forms. There's salts and esters, and there's some bioidentical versions of ketones that I think have been on the market now. Any insight into that, since you seem to be delving into this a little more?
Yeah. So what I've been doing for the past year is just doing powdered MCT oil, which is like a pure C8 form. The MCT oil, I think the powdered C8 comes from coconut origins, but it's pure C8 powder. And I put like 2 tablespoons of it in a coffee before I'm going to do a podcast or something. And, within 20 to 30 minutes, like I can feel my brain switch on. It's like someone turned the on button back on. And, I know I'm not always going to be in this sleep deprived era of my life. I have really fragmented sleep right now with the 2 babies, but I still think that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be supplementing with ketones. So I also have recently started trying this butane diol form of it, which is basically you drink it. It's a drinkable form, and then your liver converts it to BHB, which is like the storage form of ketones, which then goes out into circulation and interconverts between acetoacetate and BHB, and then spontaneously will degrade into acetone, the breath ketone. So I've been playing around with this drinkable form before and just seeing if it is better. So far, I don't know because I just started taking it, but I think it's good for people to try different kinds and see, which form they like. I have to say they do generate, I think, pretty similar results in terms of the ketone levels. One of them tends to taste a lot better than the other. So like powdered MCT oil, if you put it in your coffee with like some cinnamon, it tastes pretty good. The butane diols, the liquid forms, I don't know how many you've tried, but they taste like gasoline, most of them. There's a new one that I'm trying right now, which has added this like really nice peach flavor to it. So it kind of tastes like a peach cough syrup kind of thing. So I'm testing it out to see if it's worth the taste of it, because it's not as easy to put back as the powdered MCT oil, which tastes a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I've had companies that'll send me stuff to try all the time.
Yeah,
just because I have a platform. They're like, "Well, try this out," and most of the time, I'm like, sorry, but yeah, I mean, if something tastes like gasoline, it's pretty hard to justify wanting to drink that. I mean, if you gave it to your kid, they would spit it out. They'd be like, "No,
oh
thanks,
yeah,
I'm not eating
oh
this
yeah."
stuff." So you got to wonder about some of those things.
That is one area that I am excited about a potential application is with ADHD with the ketone drinks. I do think like it's a massive problem that we're seeing, in North America and worldwide with children with ADHD. And Dr. Dom D'Agostino has told me that he's sort of been talking about it with parents, and he's received quite a few emails from parents saying it's making a big difference for them. So I do think that's like a potential application of those drinks if they can make them taste good. I know a lot of companies are working on making them taste, palatable, because like you said, that's probably one of the bigger obstacles is, kids are not going to drink something if it doesn't taste, that good.
Yeah, and I mean, no doubt. I mean, you're probably familiar with some of the metabolic psychiatry that Chris Palmer, Jan Bazzucchi's foundation, and others are doing around that regard. With ketones, and they're showing just incredible schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar depression, anxiety, on and on. And I've been in this carnivore space for so many years now that I've seen just. I cannot tell you how many mental health issues that have gotten better, and ADHD being one of those. And so ADHD, autism, PTSD, Tourette's syndrome, I mean, the list goes on and on. Good nutrition impacts our brain. Clearly it does. And like I said, if you can't convince somebody to do a ketogenic diet, and not everybody will, I mean, then this is where you might see where you can get some benefit. Like somebody's asked me, I did a consultation the other day with somebody whose father is a guy in Sweden, and his father was 65, Alzheimer's, dementia, very young for this. And he was in a home, and he's like, what the heck can I do? And I'm like, look, I mean, maybe diet will help. Maybe put him on a ketogenic carnivore style diet might be appropriate, but you're going to have to fight with that facility for them to implement it, because they're not going to want to do it. They're going to probably resist you. They're going to want to give your dad that little piece of cake at night. This is what they do. These people, they just over medicate these people, sit them in a wheelchair and feed them cake all day. I mean, this is what these nursing homes end up doing. And, I said, well, maybe this is a place where maybe exogenous ketones might have some, at least they can kind of move you a little bit. Maybe you can get a little bit of capacity. Maybe you can kind of get them out of that place, and you can have more control over what's going on. But that's interesting to see where this research might go.
Yes. And what's really interesting too is that glucose metabolism in the brain does start to diminish as people get older, but the ketone metabolism doesn't. It's really conserved. So, it's very exciting to see the potential applications. Like I know you've seen with Alzheimer's and with other neurodegenerative conditions, because, it can really help provide this alternative fuel for the brain. So I think, there's a lot of people who could benefit from taking them exogenously, only because it is difficult to get people to do a ketogenic diet in some cases, especially with children. I do find, the higher protein keto approach, a little bit sort of Mediterranean style it's a little bit easier to do for people and for children also who are in need of ketones. But if you can't get there, then, you can at least drink them.
Let me just delve into that a little more, because when you say a high protein ketogenic approach, I mean, a lot of people will complain that eating higher protein makes it more difficult for them to achieve a ketosis. So how do you walk that without exogenous ketones? Can you make that work without it? Is it just meal frequency, or how do you get around that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So, the traditional ketogenic diet macros, you're looking at, upwards of 80% of the intake from fats, 15% protein, 5% carb. And the high protein diet, the higher protein keto diet, is about 65% protein and, around 20 to 25% fats, and then, around the rest of it is in carbohydrate, or like 5 to 10%. Now, the few ways that I personally do it to still get ketones is I'd still practice intermittent fasting. That's a really good way to do it. So if you're doing a lower carb approach and you have intermittent fasting, that usually will get you into ketosis. You have to be active. So for most people who are inactive, protein becomes anti-ketogenic because it can enter, the Krebs cycle the same way that carbs can. But if you are active, then a lot of that protein just goes to your muscles instead of going to, become oxidized as sort of a derivative of glucose. And so, being active is one of the ways. There's actually the ISSN recently put out a position stand paper about ketogenic diets talking about active individuals and how, protein is way less anti-ketogenic for those people.
Yeah, I think it was Alex Leaf on that paper.
Yes.
Jose Antonio runs ISSN. Yeah. And that was the thing. The biggest criticism was, yes, the people that don't do well with keto often are under eating protein and calories too, from an athletic standpoint. So, but let me go, because you said 65% of the calories are coming from protein. That's pretty high protein. I mean, that's way up.
Sorry, 65% is fats. I thought I said.
Okay,
did I say protein?
Okay,
I'm in my sleep deprived era.
Yeah, because then I can say, because that's what I do. I'm eating a ribeye steak that's about 65 fat. Yeah. So, because when you said 65% protein, I say, wow, that's like, what do you eat? Just a bunch of shrimp and chicken breast. Okay, so that's easier to understand. Yeah. So
I need to kick back some ketones before.
Yeah, maybe you do.
Podcast.
Unless I heard it wrong, but I think that's how I heard it. So what does that look like practically from a dietary? So what in the real world, because we can't just talk about protein macros without assigning food to it.
Yeah, I love this question. Also, love all these questions. For anyone who's carnivore, I mean, it's pretty much doing a carnivore diet where you don't add fats. You're eating, like you said, your ribeye steak, your salmon, sirloin steak, lots of different cuts of steak or burgers, like chicken thighs. I know a lot of carnivore people don't really like chicken as much, because ruminant animal meat is definitely at the top. But, I like variety. I like to do some poultry, chicken and turkey, turkey thighs, duck. We do a lot of, especially in Czech. It's very popular.
Duck is good. Gosh, duck is so good.
It's like dark meats, very high fat content. And it's super popular here. It's like what Czechs eat at Christmas, and it's like also on every menu in the restaurants here. So it's a really good source of protein and fat. And, just eating like whole foods, like an egg has protein and fat in it in the perfect ratios. As you know, a lot of whole food dairy. I'm a huge fan of dairy because it's an amazing source of protein. It's an amazing source of calcium and lots of other micronutrients. And, you're not like adding sticks of butter to your steak unless you are someone who is really trying to get into those ketogenic, ranges and produce ketones from the diet as well. But, most of us have stored fat on our bodies that we can also tap into. So you don't need to, in my opinion, add a lot of fat unless you're doing a medical, like a therapeutic ketogenic diet for medical purposes or medical reasons. But what that looks like is just very like standard ketogenic diet. Now, standard carnivore diet. I don't do like pure carnivore anymore. I do eat whole food, mostly vegetables and some fruits like berries on a pretty consistent basis. I have like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries in a protein shake. That's pretty much all I have in terms of fruit, but lots of like high fiber vegetables. So I've added that in as well. I just like the variety. And, with my family, like having them all just eat carnivore, like especially with the kids, just doesn't really work for us as a family. So I've kind of, I do kind of a high protein, like Mediterranean style approach. I do add some fats sometimes, like if it's like in a salad dressing or a sauce, like hollandaise or béarnaise or, pepper sauce for steak or something like that. But it's like just eating foods in their whole form, a lot of whole foods and eating them in their whole form, but without having to, go out of your way to add like a copious amount of fat, which for me, those traditional keto macros, for most people, I just don't think it's very sustainable unless you are very motivated to do it because of, a therapeutic reason. it's just like, you just have to you just have to consume so much fat. And like that never was very appealing to me. And it also didn't feel natural. Whereas like this way of eating, you're just eating whole foods. It feels very natural to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that that style of approach would work well for many, many people, just getting the garbage out there, eating whole foods. And, I think for those that need to do a therapeutic ketogenic level, I mean, there's a recent paper that came out on glioblastoma, brain cancer. And they showed that survival rates in those in the ketogenic state was like 66% at 3 years. And those that were not maintaining a ketogenic state was only 8%. So it's huge survival benefit. Now, again, it's a small study, and there's certainly some potentials for confounders there. But I mean, there are reasons why you might want to really up the fat, but for general maintenance, probably isn't one of them necessarily.
Yeah. Did it work for you when you were doing it in the fall, and then did you go back?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got my, I don't generally run high ketones. I mean, generally, I don't check it that often. Once in a while, I've got some ketone monitors that people sent me. So every once in a while, I go, well, let's see what it is. Like I checked it, I think the other day, it was 0.2. So, not high, and I'm not really worried about it. But, I did get it up, where I was at 2-3 millimolar. We're definitely in a nutritional ketosis stage. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I felt a little less inflammation. I think that was fair to say. But for me, I just can't, I have a hard time maintaining I just like eating a lot of protein. I mean, I just like it. I mean, I just feel good. I feel stronger. And that's what's valuable to me as a individual. I like being an athlete. I like being strong. I like being able to function and having decent muscle mass. I think that's beneficial. Some people would argue with that. I think the preponderance of the literature would suggest that having good muscle is beneficially from just about every metric you can imagine. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I do. Like I said, it's fun to play from time to time, but I mean, at some point it's like, most animals are not playing with their diet. They're just like, I just eat what I eat, and they're good to go, and it works pretty well. And so, like I said, I'm not strictly religious about a carnivore diet. I mean, I pretty much do it most of the vast majority of the time, just because it's easy, it's convenient. I like it. I don't really unlike you, I don't like vegetables. I never liked them. I always thought I hated them. I always have to choke them down. I remember when I was a kid and I moved to Texas, and Texas is famous for its Tex-Mex, and all that's just got like, you got your meat, but then you got your onions and your peppers and your tomatoes. Yeah. I hated all of those things. I literally was in there like scraping that crap off my plate. Couldn't just give me the meat. I mean, I just never liked that stuff. Oh, I hated that stuff. And I'll tell you a funny story. I told us the other day, but I hated the Mexican, the spices. I just hated the onions and the peppers so much. I didn't like tamales because I just didn't associate. But I remember I was out in college one time. We drove out to this ranch. A friend of mine had a ranch, and we were out drinking beer and stuff. We were doing stupid stuff. But anyway, this guy comes in and brings some tamales, and he was a guy from Mexico, brought some tamales, man. And he wanted us to try them, and I just said, no, thanks. I don't like that stuff. He literally pulled a gun out and pointed it at my head and said, eat them. and so I did. I ate it because I was forced to at gunpoint. But I just, that's what it took for me to want to eat that stuff, is I had to put a gun to my head before I would eat it. And to this day, I can.
That is insane.
Yeah, I mean, it was like,
but a very Texas story.
Well, it's just like, it's like stupid stuff you do when you've been drinking. But I mean, it was one of those deals where, I can remember going to China, like Japanese, like Benihana type places where they chop up, they make rice, and I liked everything, and they throw rice in there and they chop up an onion and throw it in there. And trying to pull onions out of white rice is really challenging, but I would literally sit there for 20 minutes before I would eat and pull every damn onion out of that dish before I would eat it, because they made it for the whole group and I didn't want to be a pain in the ass. And so I would just sit there, and I can remember us pulling onions out of this stuff, trying to pull it all to the side, pull out like 50 pieces of onion, and then I could finally eat. And then every once in a while I bite when I'm like, ah. So
what do you do with your kids?
Yeah. So my kids,
what do you do with your kids?
So my kids will eat a lot of meat. They'll eat a lot of eggs. They'll eat a lot of dairy products. And then beyond that, I let them kind of have what they want after I'm like, hey, eat your protein first. Make sure you get that out of the way. Get your food. And then if you're still hungry, if you want to eat fruit, if you want to eat vegetables. Most of them don't want to eat vegetables. Actually, my youngest son, he's liking vegetables more. I'm always like, ugh, because they're cutting up tomatoes. I'm like, no thanks. They eat very little junk. I mean, okay, once in a while, sometimes, but it's pretty uncommon. They're all lean, they're all healthy, they're all smart, they're all well behaved. I mean, they're good kids. They're not, they're not depressed or crazy or anything like that. They're all doing well. So
awesome.
Yeah, I think that's important to get good quality, good high quality nutrition in there, and let them figure out what they want to do, with their life. But they're educated. I mean, like as my kids became old enough to understand like concepts, like you said, your 3-year-old knows, hey, meat's good for me. You get that messaging. Hey, look, this sugary stuff is not good for you. Go read the label. We go to the store shop. Hey, Daddy, can I have this? I said, well, let's look at the label. What's in there? And he said, well, there's this and this. And I kind of teach them that, hey, you probably don't need this stuff in your body. It's not going to help you. So then they start to, and like my daughter is an athlete, I said, I think you need about 130 grams of protein a day, given your size. Go pick out a menu for the day. Calculate how much protein, and you can figure out what foods are going to get you there, how hard it is to get there. And she's like doing those lessons to sort of learn about nutrition.
Yeah, it's great when they're motivated, and you connect their nutrition with their goals. It really makes a big difference.
Well, and then, I mean, obviously you're modeling, they see you, if mom and dad just eat junk all the time and sit around and watch TV, that's what they think is normal. That's what they're going to do. And so you're setting these patterns, and the kids more see you than they hear you. I mean, they want to, if you got to demonstrate this stuff for them. I think that's incredibly important.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so you said you're working on a new book, if I heard you correctly. What is the purpose of that book? What's it about?
Well, my first book, Keto Essentials, that was published several years ago, and it was all about ketogenic diets. And I've been doing this sort of like high protein approach for several years now, and a lot of the people who read my first book have been asking me to, do a new one about, the higher protein approach, and it takes a lot of, research. So that's something that I'm finally making the time for. Again, when we had the boys, I was not expecting how much it would sort of tilt my whole center of gravity, around them. And I definitely took a big step back from a lot of my, professional projects because, like speaking and traveling and all that, because I just want to be with them all the time. And I'm doing homeschooling now with my 3.5-year-old. We started this year. So it really is such a passion of mine to be with the kids all the time. My husband is feels very similarly. So we're really enjoying being with the kids, and a lot of things I was working on sort of took a back seat, but now I do feel like I have, a little bit more time and energy. So I'm excited to start working on, this. I have been working on it, but just, put more time into this new book, which has been a long time coming, and working on some new revised meal plans and just really updating it all with the latest research, because as I was saying at the top of the episode, there's just so much exciting research coming out, on high protein intakes. I mean, it was only a few years ago still that people really believed like protein is going to make your kidneys explode, or like make you super acidic and all this stuff. And although in our space, I think we really understand that all of that is nonsense, in the general public, I think there's still quite a bit of work to do there, sort of helping people understand the importance of protein, not just for your muscles, also for your bones, also for your brain, pretty much for everything in your body, hormones to neurotransmitters, everything really benefits from having, an optimized protein intake. So I'm very excited about that because it is a huge passion of mine, and it'll probably, it'll probably take some time. It'll be a labor of love, but I'm enjoying getting back to work on that for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wonder, one of the things that I see, particularly with regard to diabetics, type 1s, type 2s, sometimes the protein they've got to, like a type 1 diabetic will have to cover protein with insulin. That's something that, it's surprising that a lot of physicians don't even seem to understand this. But I've seen some people let me just, I guess it's interesting because like particularly things like protein powders, which we often see utilized as a sort of an adjuvant way to get extra protein in. the powder changes the absorption characteristics. And so sometimes we'll see almost a carbohydrate-like effect with protein powders. Do you have any thoughts on the protein qualities? I mean, obviously, I'm obviously a big proponent of animal source proteins. I think probably as you are, but any concrete knowledge on, comparing these different types of proteins, where they come from, how they're delivered?
Yeah. So I definitely heard that over the years as well. And I think, so there is definitely an insulin rise when you have whey protein isolate, but it's not the same insulin rise that you have when you consume like a bolus of carbohydrates. Like that insulin rise is really, to mobilize those glucose transporters to the surface of the cell. When you eat whey protein, especially one that is rapidly absorbed, you usually have a high amount of leucine in there, and that high amount of leucine, which is the amino acid that is sort of detected by your body when that level rises, above about 3 grams in your blood, it initiates this process of muscle protein synthesis, and insulin is involved in that process, and it does rise, but it's a good thing. It's like the same way that people think of, mTOR, being good, but you don't want too much mTOR. Well, really, like it's sort of a backwards way of looking at it, because yes, mTOR is great. It's involved in that muscle protein synthesis. Is it in any way bad for you? No, but if you are consuming an excess amount of energy calories and you're constantly sort of pushing on those growth pathways involved in mTOR, that's where it could become a negative thing. But when it comes to protein and the consumption of protein, it's always going to be good for you. Whey protein, when it comes to whey proteins, whey protein isolate, I think is really important. If someone is looking for like a whey protein drink, you have to make sure that you get a pure isolate, because a lot of times it'll even say whey protein isolate on the front of the container, and you turn it around and it's actually whey protein concentrate, and they've added in some isolate in there. So if you get the isolate, you don't get any fat with it, which usually comes in the concentrate, and you don't get any lactose, and you don't get usually, some of the more allergenic elements are usually present in the concentrate. So a lot of people do really well with a pure whey protein isolate. In my opinion, that's the highest quality, and it's a derivative of milk. So it is an animal source product. It is just a little bit more processed. And I think that there's a tremendous application for that potentially with our elderly population, because it is very difficult sometimes to get, people who are older to eat more protein, especially if it's like, getting them to eat more steak or chicken. A lot of people fear eating animal protein because they're concerned about cholesterol, or they're concerned about protein itself damaging them in some way. Sometimes I find it's easier to get someone to add in a protein. So like, for example, in my family, like my parents, they like to have cereal for breakfast, and it hasn't been something that, I've been able to convince them to change. But now they add in protein powder into their cereal, and it completely changes the nutritional profile of that meal, because now you're initiating muscle protein synthesis with your first meal of the day. Yes, there's still cereal involved, but at least, you're getting that high quality protein there. So I'm a big fan of whey protein. I think it's excellent. And I don't have any concerns with the insulin rise from that. I just think people should make sure that they get a high quality whey protein isolate, and make sure it doesn't have a lot of like additives in it that could potentially be in there, or even sugar, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if we look at like PDCAAS scores or DIAS scores, the different ways we evaluate protein absorption, whey proteins are always at the top. I mean, it's at the very top of the list, even higher than like beef and eggs and other sources of protein. So it's clearly
right up there with breast milk.
Yeah, I mean, it's a quite good, source of protein. Assuming people tolerate it, and there are people that, like I said, for whatever reason, dairy products are a net problem for them. So the other thing that, and I don't know if you've delved much into this, is that, when we talk about glucose, insulin, and so on and so forth, that there's an impact of glucagon that has an impact as well. And protein will stimulate glucagon release. I mean, we have receptors. And so sometimes in diabetics, that ratio is balanced. Normally they balance each other out. And so sometimes these diabetics, they can't either they don't have any insulin, or they're so resistant to it, it's essentially effective, but the glucagon is still dominant. So what happens is through glycogenolysis, glucagon causes the liver to dump glucose. I mean, it's one of the things that happens when we exercise. All those counter-regulatory hormones allow us to surge glucose so we can run away from that bear that's chasing us. I mean, our body thinks when we're exercising, we're running from a bear. So, so we have this physiology that does that. So any thoughts on the role of glucagon, or do you delve into that much?
I don't. I did interview this really wonderful scientist. I'm trying to remember his name. I'm sure you've probably interviewed him, but he's a type 1 diabetic, and he's done an amazing amount of research on protein. But he was saying that, in a lot of situations, type 1 diabetics need more protein than they think. But it's really an area that I'm not qualified to.
Yeah, I mean, it might be R.D. Dykman or something like that, Dave Dykman, I think. But I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure. His son was diabetic, and maybe not, or maybe Andrew Kutnick. I'll have to.
Yeah, it's Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, Andrew. I've yet.
He's amazing.
I think and he's a good athlete. He's an athlete, and he's published a lot. He did a nice 10-year series on himself where he looked at all of his cardiovascular markers, and as a type 1 diabetic, he's more healthy than a non-diabetic, which is quite interesting to see.
Yeah, we had a great conversation about that. And, he's really like, he optimizes his protein intake. He went on this amazing fat loss journey also from when he was younger. So yeah, definitely more qualified to talk about protein.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think most people need more protein. I mean, I think that's clear to say. I mean, as you mentioned, the average person is consuming around 15% across the board, and probably double that or closer, 25% or something like that is probably better for most. Well, I mean, again, it depends how many calories you consume, but it's clear to say that the USRDA is probably under-proteined. I think that's a pretty safe assumption at this point.
Yeah. And people, there's just such a big knowledge gap out there because most people think if they want to get healthier, they should cut out red meat. They still think that, even though, we have research coming out now showing, red meat does not give you cancer. It does not give you all these issues. But you meet a lot of people, like my parents' friends or older who say, I'm trying to get healthier. So I cut out, red meat, cutting out all the meat, and they think they're, going plant-based is going to benefit their health. And it's like, that's like the last thing you should be doing, at this point. But, you could always add in a protein powder.
I think that message is shifting. I mean, I saw a recent survey out of Europe where in Europe where they found that, I think they looked at 5 countries and they saw a significant for the first time ever. I mean, this is ever since they've been doing these surveys, that people are saying they're going to eat more red meat for health reasons. So they're starting to understand. So this message is getting out there finally. All the work we've been doing, talking about this for the last nearly a decade, I think is starting to sink in for some people. So anyway, well, Vanessa, we're just about out of time. Share with us your websites, handles, social media, all that stuff, so we can find out where to talk to you.
Sure. Well, such a pleasure to be here with you again, Shawn. You can catch me every week on the Optimal Protein Podcast, where we talk all about optimizing your protein intake. And I get to interview wonderful researchers and protein scientists and people like yourself talking about how to optimize your protein intake. And I do have one book out. I am working on the second one, as I said, and you can stay tuned for that. Follow me on Instagram at Ketogenic Girl or at the Optimal Protein Podcast, and you can stay in touch with me and connect with me there.
Awesome. Well, it's good catching up with you, and take care of those little babies and keep doing a good job. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.